is secularism really still existing today in Russia, knowing that after so many years of communism power plus the modernity of nowadays society, where religion has pretty much abated compared to the times of the Romanov, is this topic of church and state still really concretely existing nowadays compared to the Romanovs era?
The reason that that is such an incredibly interesting question is that I actually went to a conference in Moscow devoted to the issue of secularism in the Soviet Union and the attempt to create a secular society. And one of the things that came out of that conference is that while the Soviet Union existed, everyone talked about the persecution of religion and the attempt to stamp out religion. But at the very end, did the Russian Federation, Russia, did it end up in the same place that it would have ended up, even if communism had not happened, given what happened in European countries? If you compare piety, if you compare religious observance in France, if you compare religious observance in rural Germany in 1914 compared to religious observance in France and Spain now, the really staggering thing is that in terms of whether you want to use metrics like church attendance, whether you want to use metrics like baptism, it's actually quite striking to ask oneself the question, all that effort to wipe out religion, and for what? To end up in the same place that Europe ended up without actually having to do this? But I think a more interesting question would be to compare Russia now to, let's say, to compare it to Romania, which is to say to another Orthodox country, to another historically Orthodox country, but which was communist for a shorter span of time and did not go through the worst bit of religious persecution that Russia and Ukraine and Belarus went through in the 1930s. So that in a place like Romania, for example, which although it was communist for far shorter, their religious participation is much higher than it is in, let's say, Russia. So in that sense, you actually can say that yes, all of that communist destruction of the village and that extra 30 years of communism really was quite devastating. It's not to say that secularism has triumphed, but...
Yeah. What I think is interesting about the Russian case and throughout Georgia, I think, is a separate example because of the different relationship of the Georgian church to society there. But in Russia and to an extent in Ukraine, except maybe in West Ukraine, which for the same reasons was communist, less than the rest, is today in contemporary Russia it's a kind of odd mix of religiosity and secularism, which is that the Orthodox Church is the church that people don't go to. In other words, they're not Orthodox, or they're not actively seeking another religion. They're just not particularly active in day-to-day Orthodoxy. But they claim it as an identity. They will, they want to see churches built. They want to see this kind of reference to Orthodox identity. But then they don't want much interference in how they run the day-to-day lives. And you can see that with, yes, there's a fasting menu when it's a fast day that no one, a few people will have. But people aren't going to. What people don't want is a return to where yeah, it's a Friday, but I'm still going to have my sausage today, and don't tell me that, because the church tells me not to eat it today. Or, yes, you can have someone on TV reminding me that today's a fast day and that I shouldn't eat meat, but I'm still going to have the freedom to go out and have my sausage or steak or things, even though it's against the church calendar. So that's what I find interesting and why it ties back to this political issue, which is that you have people that overall are not particular churchgoers. So it's not... the strength of the Orthodox Church in Russia is a small group of very committed members, 2 to 3% of the population that are really devout and are the ones that are the backbone of the social work and of other things. And then a larger majority of people that want Orthodoxy there but are somehow disconnected from it in a day-to-day sense, but still see that as a marker of identity that they don't want. They don't want to become something else. They don't want to be Protestant or Catholic or embrace another religion, but they just don't want to necessarily be particularly devout. And I think it's similar, not only as your point about Romania, but you can see that trend in Greece, where The Greek church, the Orthodox Church, is the church the majority of Greeks just don't go to, but they don't go anywhere else.
But at the same time, in Greece, they wanted to keep it on the
identity cards, right? Yeah, the only time I darken a church door is, when I was baptized, when I married, and when I'm going to be buried. But don't take Orthodox off my line 5 on my identity cards.